Yo, YouTube. We are back working on the Take 5 Cube. I think maybe we might have a little influx of listeners as we talked about this on the podcast this week, but this is the 7th or 8th video in this series, and I recommend checking out the prior ones if you want to play along. But we are documenting the entire design process of my new Desert Cube Take 5. The idea is you draft normal 3x15, you end up with a 45 card pool, you get to make only 5 cuts, hence the Take 5. And then you play the remaining 40 cards. So basically, we're forcing people to play pretty janky decks where they have to put cards in their main deck they would not normally want to. And within that restriction, we are trying to force people to do a bunch of funky, cool synergy stuff. And basically, trying to include a bunch of cards that allow people to have a sort of Koa's buyout mode on them so that they are at least playable in your deck, if much worse, if you don't have particular color of mana. Good examples here are like all the morphs. And also trying to basically include these colorless cards in the list that people will look at and in a normal draft would say, well, I'm going to put this in the sideboard because this will never be useful. It's magical Christmas land. I think this card would be useful. But in this cube, think, well, it's colorless. And also, there's 3 cards or 4 cards in my deck that do something with it. So it's better than nothing. And today we're talking about one such card that is just fits the vibes perfectly. It is Sundial of the Infinite. This was recommended by Machine Schooling on YouTube. Thank you, Machine Schooling. This is the perfect card for this cube. 2-mana artifact, tap, pay 1 and tap, end the turn, activate this ability only during your turn. This is a tricky little card that can allow you to basically clear the stack. If you have some stuff on the stack you don't want, you just end the turn. All that bad stuff goes away. So in the absence of any synergies within your deck, it kind of makes your opponent play at sorcery speed, even with their instants, because if they are trying to end step their Factor Fiction, you can just end the turn when they put their Factor Fiction on the stack. Now, it doesn't really stop them from countering your spell, because if they play a counter spell, you can end the turn, but then both their counter spell and the thing you would put on the stack are going to be, countered and removed from the stack. But in terms of just holding up instant card draw or whatever, or even interaction, like you go to combat, you attack, your opponent tries to remove something, you can just end the turn, and your attack is over, but you've essentially fizzled out a removal spell. So the sort of level 1 is just, it does kind of weirdly force your opponent a little bit to play at sorcery speed when they might not want to. And then this has a lot of overlaps with things that the cube is already doing. I had one of those moments where I haven't talked much all day. I've been just home alone working. You start talking for the first time in the day, and you yawn a whole bunch. Is that a thing other people experience? I know I'm experiencing it. So anyway, Sundial Infinite is for sure going in this cube. It's perfect. It's exactly what I want for this cube. It's a card that any deck can play, and that you could get early and then maybe try and build around, and we'll talk about all the ways to build around it. That's what this update is going to be about. Or you could get it late and just be like, well, it does kind of actually do something with a couple cards in my deck. Let's just run it because it's better than nothing. And that's sort of pushing people to run the cards that are just a little better than nothing is what this cube is all about. So first, let's talk about the things that this works with that are already in the cube. And the biggest, most obvious overlap is the whole Phyrexian Dreadnought package. This is why Machine Schooling recommended it in the first place. These are all creatures with bad downside ETBs. Phyrexian Dreadnought, sacrifice creatures, total power 12 or greater. Eater of Days, skip your next 2 turns. Leveler, exile your library. These are all bad things, obviously, and so you can just play these creatures with additional 1 mana up. As soon as that trigger goes on the stack, you end the turn with Sundial of the Infinite. Jesus. Oh, should I stop and start recording again? I'm not going to. You're all going to experience this with me. It's just a way to end with, to basically stop those negative ETBs. This sort of little package and the things that support it, I would consider a core part of this cube, and so for that reason alone, I think Sundial of the Infinite is a pretty easy add. For that reason and the reasons we just talked about sort of mildly disrupting your opponent. But there are a lot of other really cool things you can do with this card that I am quite excited about. And I have been adding a bunch of things to my maybe board. Shout out to the person on YouTube that also pointed out that you don't have to type the entire tag in. You can just type a portion of the tag and it will work. So I don't have to get the whole tag specifically exactly right, which is great. Let's talk about cards that are going to support Sundial of the Infinite. So, first, in terms of redundancy. Discontinuity is a great example of redundancy. This is also a perfect card for this cube, honestly. 3 blue, blue, blue for an instant that ends the turn, which you can do on your opponent's upkeep. They get to untap, but then before they draw a card for turn, before they get a combat step, before they get to hopefully use their mana, you just end the turn. You can also end the turn when they put a spell in the stack, if you to basically use it as a fancy counterspell. That will usually mean you've let them get to their draw step, so they've gotten the card back anyway, but there are times where you still want to do that. But importantly, this card costs 2 blue blue less to cast if you are casting it during your turn. So for just 2 generic mana, 1 and a blue. For 1 and a blue, you get to just end the turn. This seems obvious. I discovered this in Scotty Mertz Telling Time cube list when Scotty Mertz responded to me on Blue Sky when I asked, what are people doing in their cubes with Sundial of the Infinite? And that's where I found this card. And I think having a little redundancy for this is great. This will just do all the things Sundial of the Infinite does. It is in blue, but it also has a completely reasonable buyout mode. Like if you just get to 6 mana, it's just kind of a weird time warp, a bad time warp at 6 mana, which is, I think, exactly what this cube wants. So that is going in for sure. Another card that is an easy add is Ideas Unbound. Blue, blue, draw 3, then discard 3 at the end of the turn. It is an arcane sorcery, which maybe could end up mattering, but we already want a bunch of looting in this cube for a bunch of reasons we've already talked about. Discarding is already a theme in this cube. There's a lot of reasons to want to put cards in your graveyard. There's a lot of self-mill things. This card is actually kind of just fine as it is. In normal constructed Magic or other sort of contexts, this card is kind of an unfair combo card. If you draw 3 cards but then win that turn, then the downside is gone, and so you can just use this as a 2-mana draw 3. Though honestly, by modern standards, that's probably not even that good anymore. But there was a period in time where this was played in some Eternal formats as just a sort of combo card. Here, I think very often you're just going to cast it fairly, but you can also cast it, draw some cards, and then at any point, I guess specifically you have to wait until the discard 3 cards trigger goes on the stack. That's a delayed trigger, because otherwise, if you ended the turn in the middle of your second main phase, then that trigger would go on the stack, and you would still have to discard 3 cards. So you got to wait for that trigger to go on the stack, then you end the turn with Sundial of the Infinite, and that trigger is basically gone. So it's a way you can draw 3 cards just for 2 mana with no downside. So that's a really easy way to these kind of cards I'm obsessed with. When I can get cards that play like a bread and butter role, like looting is just the thing you want a lot of in this cube. I want a lot of looting, but that bread and butter role also has overlap with some really funky little synergy, like Sundial of the Infinite or Discontinuity. I'm very into that. And another sort of thing this reminds me of is the Nameless Inversion Hacken, combo, which may prove to be toxic, but for now it's like a cool that a removal spell, which is a pretty bread and butter card in this cube, also is going to function as a combo piece essentially with Hacken. So Ideas Unbound is also a windmill slam on account of being just a nice bread and butter effect. Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker, anything that creates a token that you then sacrifice at the end step or at the end of combat or whatever, all these things can be abused with Sundial of the Infinite for the same reasons. As soon as that trigger goes in the stack, you just end the turn. And I think Kiki Jiki is also just very cool here in general. I mean, I talked about looking for high devotion cards that were cool, like Phyrexian Obliterator is in this space because the colored mana is so hard to come by. So it's cool for that reason alone. And then being able to copy anything, or any creature, obviously non-legendary creature, when all the creatures are so weird and funky is really going to open up a lot of potential cool combinations of things, I think. It's also one of the few cards in the cube with haste for something like Soulflayer. Like Kiki Jiki seems like a good fit to me here in general. I do want to be careful not to include any of the just A plus B combos with Kiki Jiki. I don't want to be able to go infinite with just 2 cards. I'll have to triple check and make sure there's nothing in there right now that does. I'm almost certain there isn't. But I don't like this is not the cube where you're going to play Phyrexian Dreadnought and just stifle the ETB, like the most iconic, efficient combo. This is also not the cube where you're going to Kiki Jiki into Pestermite or Splinter Twin or something. I guess vice versa would be the normal sequencing. You're not going to go infinite with just 2 cards. I want you to be playing this for value or for weird 3+ card combos maybe in certain situations. Like, Sundial the Infinite is a great example of what I want you to be doing with Kiki Jiki here. So that's very cool. Another card that is a windmill slam here, I think, is Final Fortune. Take another turn after this one. You lose the game at the end of that turn. Put that in the main board as well. This is not the actual Oracle text, and this is going to be a cube that is going to require be demanding of the players and be somewhat complicated, and I'm willing to accept that. But the average player playing this cube should know, or at least learn through playing, that Final Fortune, like Ideas Unbound, creates a delayed trigger, and that trigger goes on the stack. You can then respond to it and end the turn. This is also just a card that I think is cool. Like, this is a card I expect people to just play fairly. Like, a great example of the kind of card that if you were playing some red aggressive deck in a normal cube, you would very often get to your deck building portion and go, well, Final Fortune is too unreliable. It's too high variance, right? Like, sure, sometimes I'll get to like Time Walk and win the game, but what happens if I Time Walk and they have a removal spell in response and now my clock is no longer lethal? Like, it's just a very high risk card. But here, you just are going to have to play it because you're not going to have that many playables. And once you put it in your deck, you're going to find times where it shines, and you just got to cast Time Walk for red, which is very cool. So this is a perfect card for this list, and the fact that it works with Sundial and just becomes full-on Time Walk is awesome. I am going to eventually, at some point in the future, be adding Isochron Scepter to this cube, and that will be maybe one of the most efficient 3-card combos will be Isochron Scepter with Sundial the Infinite and Final Fortune under it, and you can just take all the turns. But that's the kind of thing I want people to be rewarded for in this cube, if you get to do that. That's just cool. So that's another thing for Sundial, another little treat for the Sundial deck. Last non-land treat for the Sundial deck is Cedrus the Traitor King. This is a big boy. 3 Grixis, so 6 mana total for a legendary creature zombie warrior. Each creature card in your graveyard has unearthed 2 black. This is recommended by CB Gannon on Blue Sky. I'm a mess today. I should really re-record this if I cared about, the production quality of these videos, but I'm just going to go, this is rough and sloppy. You're getting behind the scenes. This card is perfect. Originally printed in Alara, and sick art, really cool top end. It's a 6 mana 5/5 these days, which would not ever see print. This would have many more upsides at this sort of mana cost for sure these days. And the actual text on it, giving any creature card in your graveyard unearth for 2 black, is a really cool way to skirt the casting cost of cards. If you discard some card you can't cast, either because you were forced to main deck a creature you can't cast because you didn't have any other playables. Maybe you're playing Chromanticore in your deck for Soul Flayer, but you never drew your Soul Flayer. Now you discarded Chromanticore. You can just get that card into play for 1 turn for 2 and a black. Or for more than 1 turn if you just end the turn with the Unearth trigger on the stack. Which of course means that the other Unearth cards that are already in this list, and let's go back to the main list real quick. Like, I do have an Urch. I do have Scrapwork Mutt, Ashnod's Harvester, and Mishra's Research Desk. Now, Research Desk doesn't really make any sense because you have to sacrifice it to do anything, so you're always going to unearth and sacrifice it at the same turn anyway. But, you can keep your Scrapwork Harvester or your Ashnod's Harvester or your Scrapwork Mutt with Unearth or with Sundial the Infinite as well. I also expect there are going to be a couple more things that I have not thought of that are already in the main list. And I don't actually care to find them all. I trust my players to do so, and I think will be interesting. Fate Stitcher is another one that I've wanted to work in. This technically works with Sundial in the sense that it has Unearth, but it's really such a small interaction. Like, I would not even really count a Fate Stitcher as a thing that interacted positively with Well, no, because what does it when you untap the Sundial, though? Hold on. Is that ever a thing? Why would I ever want to untap my Sundial? I don't think that's a thing. Okay, but it's really cool with Kiki Jiki. Oh, does this go infinite with the Kiki Jiki? It does, right? Because you just... No, yeah, because it comes in with haste, untap Kiki Jiki. Sorry, no Face Stitcher. We can't do it. All right, this is good. We're on the lookout for things that are going to go infinite with the Kiki Jiki. Okay, one last thing maybe. Flicker Wisp. This card is just good generic card. It does stuff. It interacts with any permanent in play, which I think is good and interesting. And with Sundial, you can just, with the return to play trigger on the stack and the turn to make it exiled forever. Now, there is some question as to whether or not this is going to be a somewhat toxic play pattern, because what I'm also going to add along with all of these non-land cards is the full cycle of bounce lands. And this is a big part of how I plan to make Sundial actually playable, because there's not going to be that many spells you can put in your deck to make it incredible. But if you have a big chunk of your mana base that is going to use Sundial the Infinite, that I think is a really good way to make it playable. And the bounce lands are just cool in general. Now, they are pretty bad with Flicker Wisp. If you play a bounce land fairly without Sundialing or anything, and your opponent Flicker Wisps it, that's pretty bad. That's a pretty big blowout. And I don't know yet what my tolerance is going to be for those sorts of things. That's going to have to be shaken out through playtesting. But I do know that these lands are good enough with Sundial, and just to say the obvious, when it comes into play, there's a trigger to return a land you control to its owner's hand, and you just end the turn. And now you don't have to return a land to your hand. So you get to play your whole turn as you would normally, and then, end of your second main phase when you're done casting all your spells and done with combat, play your bounce land, end the turn, and you just ramped by a land thanks to Sundial. There already are also in the main list, there's like a Lotus Field, which does the same thing. Well, similar thing at least. You have to sacrifice 2 lands, and here you just, again, end the turn. So there's definitely a thing that can work there. And that's part of why I kind of wanted Fate Stitcher in here, because it would untap all the dual lands and untap the Lotus Field, but maybe I have to look for things that can specifically just untap lands. Like, what does Vizier do? That's also another target permanent, so that we can't have either due to our specific requirements around Kiki Jiki not being an AB combo with anything. Anyway, these lands are going in. And now we're fully playing dominoes, because once those lands are in, then I'm really interested in Tiller Engine, I think. There are a lot of ETB tapped lands in this list, just compared to the average cube list. And Tiller Engine is cool in that it is a perfect example, again, of like, this is a card you probably aren't going to main deck in most cubes, because you aren't going to have that many tap lands. And you're like, well, what's the upside here on a 2-mana 1/3? But in this cube, you're like, well, it's a 2-mana 1/3. You know what? It's castable. My deck can cast it, and every once in a while, I will draw it, and I will draw a Lotus Field at the same time, and then I'll get to untap my Lotus Field and, kind of go off, and that's cool. So I think I like this here, too. And eventually we're going to run out of room for all these things, but, and that was recommended by Heavenly Evan in the Discord. Shout out to Heavenly Evan. Is there anything else that sort of comes from playing this this little game of dominoes, or just kind of moving through the options here? So yeah, we'll see if Flicker Wisp ends up being a problem. These other cards, Strict Proctor is the other one that fits in here perfectly. Yeah, this is also going in. Recommended by Slopmaster Piggy on the Discord. This is the one thing that works with Dreadnought that I think actually is interesting and has other applications, and it didn't come up in my search because it doesn't actually fully stop the triggered ability, it just taxes it by 2. So 2 mana for a 1/3 flyer. Whenever a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability to trigger, counter that ability unless its controller pays 2. Right now, there's not an abundance of positive ETBs in the queue, but there are a ton of negative ETBs. And so you get to just not pay the 2 when your Dreadnought triggers, not pay the 2 when your Bounce Land triggers, not pay the 2 when your Lotus Field says sacrifice 2 lands. And I think that's very cool. Plus, it has a little bit of upside of maybe affecting your opponent every once in a while. So 19 additions is a lot. Unless there's anything else here I'm missing, I might do a quick little... Let's do a quick little back to the filter and reset this. A quick little peruse here through the rest of this list. There's just too many things to look through, I think, in real time. The one thing I have not been streaming is me just adding stuff to the maybe board, which happens kind of constantly all day when I get recommendations or think of something. But any sort of parsing of that I am including in these videos so that you can be here when I make all decisions about what goes in and out of the cube. Is there anything else that I care about? What could I search for? I think we're going to call that this edit. 19 additions. That's a lot of additions. It means we got to find a lot of cuts. And there's a couple things I'm going to cut sort of right from the top end. Just things that I feel like are not pulling their weight. And that is Metalwork Colossus, which I included originally because I'm like, there's a bunch of trinkety artifacts. But I think I'm going to be leaning so hard into these weird synergies and combos that just kind of generic cards that don't really fit any of those themes are not really going to have room. And so, yeah, this is good with the trinkety artifacts. It will be fine in this cube, but it doesn't have any cool play to it. So it is out. I'll maybe board it for now. Same with Coslight the Great Distortion. This was in here initially because I'm like, it's a discard outlet. That's cool. But as of right now, it's like the only real cheat target that you would want to put into play, which the only way to do that right now, I think, is Oath of Druids. It's out of place right now. We can always come back to it if we want. Similarly, Karn Silver Golem, I think we have other more compelling top end in colorless. Like, right now we have things like Leveler, Duplicate Witch's Removal, Salvage Titan, sacrifice their artifacts rather than pay Salvage Titan's mana cost. Why would I ever want to do that? When is it worth sacrificing 3 dinky artifacts? I mean, really only if you're making, treasures or something? Maybe Salvage Titan's also a cut. we'll make a bunch of cuts, maybe come back and undo some of these edits. We'll see. Making some room there. I am going to cut a cycle of lands, and here I reach a decision point, and I truly have not decided on this. You're going to hear me talk through my thinking in real time. I could either cut one of the cycles of lands, probably the pain lands, because I like the cycling lands. Surveil lands are very powerful, but they're very, very welcome here. I like the selection and putting things in the graveyard. The future sight lands are just too cool. So realistically, it would be the pain lands I would cut, if anything, for the bounce lands. Or I just cut 2 monocolored lands from each of the 5 monocolors. And this is where we run into the question of like how easy do I want to make it to draft many colored decks in this cube? And I think cutting the pain lands for the dual lands or for the bounce lands obviously makes it harder to play many colors. And I don't have a good sense yet for where that is. I think I'm going to go with cutting the pain lands for now, with the understanding that if in the future I find myself thinking that the many color decks are too hard to draft, or mana bases are just too janky, and it's kind of ruining games, not making them interesting and more clunky like I want, then I can always come back and put these in over just a cycle of basics or something, if I decide that in the future. But for now, I think, the pain lands aren't doing anything for me. They're not synergistic in any way right now. They are just bad fixing. And so, also, I had a Godless Shrine in here at some point because I was like, I only have 3 black-white lands, but I only have 3 Selesnya lands, and it's fine. So I'm not going to worry about that. And that gets us 15 cuts already. That's great. We need 4 more cuts. Let's poke around and think about our lives. So, looking at white, all these things are pretty committed to specific themes, or they are just like removal that also are flip lands, or removal that has cycling. I definitely don't feel strongly about a lot of these cards. Like, I could see cutting McKindy Stampede, or I could see cutting either Kabira Takedown or Razor Grass Ambush, or I could see Brought Back end up not being good enough when you have Second Sunrise and Face Reward floating around, but I also don't feel like any of those are obvious easy cuts. We also only have 34 white cards, so let's leave some of those for now. If we're going to cut from, let's say, focus on the other 4 colors, just to maybe try and bring things a little more in balance, let's look at the things that just aren't part of anything fun and cool, or aren't filling sort of fundamental roles. Like, is Skyshroud Elite and Skyshroud Warbeast actually cool? Maybe not, because your opponent's just going to be forced to play a lot of non-basics in most cases. And like, yes, it's kind of cool that the sort of, the context is different, but it's not that cool. It's kind of like, all right, great. I had no choice but to take a bunch of non-basic lands. Rude Awakening is a card I stuck in here, but it has no home right now. It doesn't do anything, so that's coming out. I need just 1 more cut then, right? This was easier than I thought. That's good. Don't hesitate. Can I take Oath of Druids out for now? That was a card that Ryan called out, and I think he was right to do so. I've also been feeling like Nihilistic Glee is more narrow than Call the Bloodline and Zombie Infestation in terms of repeatable enchantment-based discard outlets. I'm also honestly feeling a little questionable about Living Death and Scrap Mastery, both of them. The black section is, I think, the most difficult to cut things from. I'm feeling really good about most of these. I could cut World Weary. It's removal with basic lands. Something with the basic lands like requires colored mana. To be fair, I also feel pretty bad about Alchemist's Greeting. Like, I think these cards are ultimately probably just not that good, because basic land cycling is already worse because you have to draft all your basics, so you aren't guaranteed to be able to get whatever you need. And also, yeah, it's just pretty bad on both sides. And then having colored mana requirements means you're not going to like fix your mana for black with it, because it requires black to basic land cycle. Let's cut World Weary for now. Okay. Create a blog post. And then once the video goes up, I'll link it from here. That's Sundial the Infinite. That was way faster than I thought. Apparently, I have no idea how long these videos are going to take, because this has only been 24 minutes, and previously these things have taken an hour when I, least expect it. But I feel pretty good about these additions. All these cards really feel like they fit the vibes. The only thing I'm a little worried about is Flicker Wisp possibly being too good against all these things that have negative ETBs. Like, here's another thing. Imagine that you, like, jump through a hoop and put your Phyrexian Dreadnought into play, and then your opponent just Flicker Wisps it. And, the hoop you jump through is no longer available to be jumped through. That's going to feel pretty bad. So that might end up being, like, too generically good and too high of an opportunity for feel bads. Comment down below if you have other suggestions for removal that gets better with... You know what? This video is short. Let's find it. Let's find it ourselves right now. We're going to start looking at Flicker Wisp specifically, because I want to copy the return to the battlefield. So this is what I want to copy. What cards do this? But will be that card, or I think ones that specify creature might say that creature. Oh, I forgot to mention, it does also already work with Astral Slide, which is in the cube. That is a very big thing with Sundial the Infinite. Though you got to enable the Astral Slide as well, which makes it kind of hard. Stag is also permanent. So these are all right. Gale Powder Mage is a more fair version of Flicker Wisp. 4 mana, 3/3. It's also kind of vibes. The fact that it's repeatable could be annoying. And no matter what, you're gonna have this sort of downside with like having Cheaty or Dreadnought into play. But I don't think you're allowed to be mad about your opponent having an answer to Dreadnought in the form of Gale Powder Mage. You could be mad about your bounce land. That you're justified in being mad about. Miss Meadow Witch is just a repeatable 4 mana activation, but it is a hybrid card. I like hybrid cards here. Rune. Teferi's Time Twist is kind of interesting with a +1/+1 counter, just because of all the keyword abilities we've been putting on creatures. Turn to Miss is a very clean version of this effect, but, just a spell, just one time. Of all of these, I think Gale Powder Mage is the one I'm excited about, and it's kind of a funky card with sick art that I've wanted to slip into a cube at some point. And this has a lot fewer downsides. All right, we're going to do it. I'm going to remove Flicker Wisp from here. I'm also going to remove it from being taken out of the sideboard for Gale Powder Mage. This has way less sort of incidental feel bad, because you can't flicker your opponent's bounce lands like you can with Flicker Wisp. It also has less play to it. It's worth noting, because Flicker Wisp can also flicker. What? That's not gonna matter. That's not gonna matter. That's not gonna matter. That won't matter. Those things won't matter. None of that matters. Okay, maybe flickering all these other things just literally doesn't matter at all. Reset your Hibernation's End. That's not good. You don't want to do that. You could flicker the dual lands that are creatures on the back to turn them back into creatures for free. So you could like cheat out an Umara Wizard by playing Umara Skyfalls and then flickering it with Flicker Wisp. Is that cool, or is that just dumb? I don't think we're missing out on a lot, to be honest, right now. All these things, what makes sense to flicker here? You could reset your Aether Vial. You could reset your Engineered Explosives. You could activate Scroll Rack twice. You could activate Birthing Pod. That's sorcerer only, so you're not going to have a chance to do that after the end step. Mirage Mirror and Flicker Wisp could do some funky things. No, probably not, actually. Yeah, really, we're not missing out on a whole lot. So I think it's going to be Gale Powder Mage over Flicker Wisp to avoid some of the feel bads. Even though Flicker Wisp is the more flexible card, Gale Powder Mage is just kind of cool. I'm into it. All right. Quick video, but that's Sundial the Infinite. I actually kind of think this card is going to be a little cracked here. I have been doing some test drafts before making these changes and thinking, gosh, this deck really wants a Sundial the Infinite. So now we'll have it, and we'll see how that goes. Ooh, let me make a dumb face for the thumbnail. What face am I making it? That's Sundial in the Infinite. Is it? There we go. Nailed it.